With over 10 years experience as a professional entertainer, Rex has learned how to relate to any crowd, in any situation. Whether he's playing in a comedy club, in a 3,000-seat theater, or out on the streets gathering his own crowd. For any situation, no one leaves them laughing and cheering for more the way Rex Boyd does.
If you really want to see this, let me hear you say, yeah! Yeah! If you risk my life, let me hear you say, yeah! Yeah! If you think I'm really cute, and you might want to go on a date with me sometime, let me hear you say, yeah! Yeah! I want you to go in the club one by one. I will catch all three, juggle all three. It'll be neat. Okay, before I do this, first of all, Mary, I need you to catch this one. Here we go. Club number one. What's your name? Club number two. Oh. Go for it. Okay, I will.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Whining On. My name is Matthew Bowden, the Incorrigible Rogue, and today we have Rex Boyd. Rex, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's nice to be here, Matt. Thanks for putting this on, man.
Hey, my pleasure. Just a quick thing for everyone who's watching. If you've just joined us the first time, if you're on YouTube, please subscribe, click the bell, let you know when we're broadcasting again. If you want to comment, I will endeavour to try and ask your questions if and when possible. If you want to say hello as well, Rex can see you in the comments. People on Facebook, if you'd like to join Whining On with public performers, or the Incorrigible Rogue fan page, which is Facebook The Public Performance. And if you'd like to help out and join the Patreon, please do. So I think we're ready to begin. Rex, as a young man, were you in a theatre family? Were you in a lineage of thespians? Was this always a foregone conclusion that this was going to be your life?
No, far from it. No, there's no history that I know of theater in my family. What it was my mother was always really encouraging of me. My parents split up when I was really young. But we're talking the early 70s. My mother would let me stay up late to watch Johnny Carson and watch Saturday Night Live and all these shows and all these variety shows that used to be on. And so I can remember lots of different variety acts and things that I saw on the television as early 70s. I was fascinated by and like the first season of Saturday Night Live, and I just loved it. And that was like got my interest up.
And did you see yourself as being involved in that at that time? Were you thinking this is what I want to do?
Not at that time, but when it became what I wanted to do was when I was in junior high school. So in the States, you're 12, 13, 14 years old. And so when I was 12 and in the middle school, junior high school, the kids who were drama kids from the high school would come visit us and they would put on a show. And we would be invited into the speech teacher's class. And then the big kids, the kids are 18 and were doing all this drama stuff, would come on and they'd put on a variety show and do some drama pieces, some comedy pieces. And that was just like my favorite day of the year to see those kids come in. And I wanted to be like that. And I decided that's what I was going to do. And I did the same.
So how did you achieve that then? Did you start going to theatre classes?
Yeah. So when I was 14, my speech teacher was a guy named Eldon Conine, Broadmoor Junior High School.
You had a speech teacher?
Yeah. So public speaking, I guess, might be a better way of putting it. I don't know if all schools did at that time or not. I think it's invaluable. I think no matter what job you do, no matter what you do in life, the ability to be confident and project yourself and communicate is like, it doesn't matter what job you do, you got to do it well. But our teacher was someone who had experience of doing big presentations and things. He was a really good teacher. And so we started doing like informative things or Yeah, it was mainly like, I remember doing a thing about mopeds because I had a moped. So I had to do a presentation, a research all about mopeds and give like, slides and presentations and stuff. Yeah, so that was the beginnings.
When I looked at your bio, it said that you did competitive public speaking, and
Yeah.
coming from a working class British comprehensive, the idea of competitive public speaking was quite alien to me.
This is another thing that, at least in Kansas, where I'm from, it's still a thing. My sister in Kansas tells me about her daughters, and what they're experiencing. One of my nieces is into competitive debate, and debate you might imagine more as like a traditional kind of thing. You'd understand that they would do at Oxford, Cambridge, that kind of thing, and I was on the creative side of it. So I wasn't interested in debating and being a lawyer and all that kind of thing. I was into the pieces where we would have like maybe about 8 or 10 high schools would meet at a certain school for a day. There would be a season of this. And you would go in and you would prepare like a 10-minute piece, and you might have a comedy piece or a drama piece or a duet, or you might have some poetry. And you would go in and you'd compete against all these other kids, and then you'd go to the semifinals and to the finals and stuff. And so from the age of 15, when I was at high school, I was immediately going, that's what I'm going to do. Because these were the same kids that had come to my junior high who were doing that, and they were practicing their pieces and stuff. And so I went, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then just took it on full board.
Did you have a natural sort of ability at doing this? Did you find it something which was quite easy for you to take to?
Yeah, I think so. In my head, I can actually remember at the age of 5, my first day of kindergarten, and I was nervous. I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I remember the teacher like saying something to me, like, and I was like just being grumpy, and I growled at her. She said, "Oh, we got a little tiger on our hands. He growls." And the other kids laughed. And I went, "Oh, if I growl again, they're going to laugh again." And I can remember that experience of going, hang on a second, I'm getting responses. And then like age 13, 14, I was a bit of a typical teenager, and I'd get in trouble for showing off in class when I shouldn't be. And I'd be acting up and trying to get laughs at the teacher's expense and that sort of stuff. But as soon as I had these competitions, and I was in I was a different class called forensics is the American word for it. So it's a weird, strange word, but this is the competitive drama and comedy speaking. So as soon as I was in there, and it was like, 2 days a week, and on the weekends, these competitions, I was being given a stage to perform on. I just ate it up.
And do you think that you were kind of like a creature under compression at this time, and giving you that avenue helped in other sections of your life? So not being the class clown as much, not being as disruptive, because you'd found an avenue to focus this kind of expression.
Yeah, I think so. It was my social avenue, my friends. One of my best friends and my best friend in high school, well, two or three of them, but the guy I ended up performing with, I'm hoping he's going to watch this sometime or another, a guy named John Lear. And he went to a different middle school. He was the funny guy at his middle school. I was the funny guy at my middle school. And when we met up, the two of us sort of latched onto each other, and we were like always trying to make our friends laugh. And we were doing stuff like out of school and social situations at the pizza restaurant or whatever. We were always just trying to think of what kind of crazy things could we do to make everyone laugh. And that's really what got the ball going, because at the age of 16, John and I sort of dared each other to go to open mic at a comedy club. And this was a proper week-long comedy club that one day a week would have open mic night. And on top of that, drinking laws in America, you have to be 21 to even get in. We were 16. But they wouldn't let us in to watch the other acts, but we could wait out in the hallway till it was our turn. And we started doing that.
And what was it like the first day doing it?
I think John and I had a real good ability to sort of like dare each other. we'd mention some kind of crazy idea, and the other would try to top it and you couldn't back out then. So we had that support for each other. And so I don't think I would have done it on my own. I would have been too frightened at that age to get into it.
And it sounds like to me that you guys are having fun. It's not like you're being academic about this. You're not sitting down and going, right, this is the theory here and this is what we're going to do. It sounds like it's a game between you guys. It's this kind of mode of socializing and play.
Completely. It was a way of, we were mixing with the drama kids, but also the jocks and the popular kids and everybody, because we were the funny guys. And so we had friends from all over the place that knew who we were, and we would do like skits in like big presentations in front of 1,500 students. They'd give us the stage for a few minutes for big audiences early on. And that was my reason to want to go to school, just get that feedback, that cheering and laughing and stuff.
And did the comedy sets become a kind of a staple of your life? Did you guys go back again and again and again and start developing bits, so to speak?
Yeah, in two ways. So in one way, John and I teamed up together at these competitions, and they had a type that was called the improvised duet acting. And what would happen is you'd pull like 3 or 4 slips of paper out of a hat, and they'd have like titles on them. And you could choose which title you wanted to do. And then you would have like a half hour to write a 10 to 15 minute show. And so basically it wasn't really totally improvised, but we would have a half hour to come up with a storyline and do these performances. And I think John and I went to like 8 different competitions, and we got first place 7 times. So we were on a roll. Yeah. And as well as that, this is the same sort of time when we were starting to juggle. John worked at a restaurant, and when it was boring at his restaurant, he learned how to juggle with lemons. Someone else in the restaurant taught him to juggle. And then like about 2 or 3 days after he was learning to juggle, he was teaching me how to juggle, because I worked in a sporting goods store in the same shopping mall, and I would get off work and go around and hang out with him. And then he started teaching me how to juggle. Well, honestly, it was not more than about 2 or 3 weeks after we learned how to juggle before we were putting juggling into our act at the stand-up night. And it was like, we got something else we can show off to people. Let's go find some people who want to watch us.
Well, that's the thing. You've done the hard bit of learning how to present pieces of work on a stage. And I suppose by doing this a lot, by working with improv, you're really developing a good understanding of how a crowd works, how you work with a crowd. And that's the difficult thing, juggling is just a matter of time and application of the pattern to practice it.
Very much so. And that was always my ideal throughout my career. I was known as semi-technical juggler. I mean, no way am I good enough to be a circus juggler or a high-level juggler. But I was fairly technical, but nothing would go in my show if it didn't have a gag with it. So every single trick I'm doing and every single routine or whatever would have to be based around, is this funny? And I quite often wasn't even, I might be doing my hardest trick and just ignoring it. And then people are starting to go, holy cow, he's actually doing a hard trick. But I'm getting them to focus on the emotion and the character and the timing.
And at this time, did you begin working on the street?
But when we began on the street was our senior year. So we're 17 years old the next year. And there is a huge festival in Kansas City called the Kansas City Renaissance Festival. And I can see in the chat that my buddy Brian Wendling is joined in the chat. So he's listening. So this is what really set my ball rolling to becoming a professional performer. Was John and I wanted to work at this festival, and Lee Ross showing up. Good man, good to see you. Hope to talk about you some too. But John and I worked at this festival, and they gave us petrol money. We were just being characters at the festival to watch the stage performers. Well, there were a lot of really good street acts. I mean, this is a festival situation and people are paying like $10 to get into the festival grounds, but the acts are passing the hat. And so they're doing every street trick and they're doing all the stuff so they can get a big hat. And there are these stages, wooden platforms set up stages, and they're hay bales for the audience to sit on. But everything other than that is like the street, the techniques, and we got to pull a crowd and we got to hat it. And the guys who just to this day, I've never seen better jugglers, are Brian Windling and his partners. He was in a group called Sideshow. And Brian still works at the Kansas City Renaissance Festival 30 years later, longer. I don't know if he's on to 40 years maybe now, but he's still doing it. But the thing was, when John and I were brand new, Brian and his partner, Scott Burton, the previous year were the team champions at the Jugglers Convention, the IJA convention. So we're just like brand new to juggling. We've hardly ever met a juggler, and we're watching the guys who just won the national championship with the most ridiculously awesome juggling. On top of that, though, they were funny, and they sort of set it in my mind that this is all about enthusiasm. It's about professionalism. It's about excitement, timing, a build, and comedy. And I think I really, really was hooked watching those guys.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned professionalism. I think that's something we'll touch on a bit later when you migrate over to Europe, because something that was described to me a number of times was that yourself and other people coming over from America had a very professional, tight style of show, whereas different from the British style of show. But we can touch on that later on. When you see that in that festival, do you guys immediately go out on the street?
So we learned, we were strolling characters at that festival, but we spent all of our time practicing. We were learning club passing from all the stage acts and just hanging out with them and watching them all the time. Sometime over that next year, we did our first ever street show, and it was in Kansas City. And it was a weeknight, and it was like nobody on the street. I think we actually got 1 or 2 people to stop and watch us. What possessed us to go out like on a weeknight in the cold in Kansas City? I have no idea, but we did it.
Had you guys been planning? Had you planned before? Was this a kind of build up and it was just all right, sod it, now we're going to do it?
No, we didn't plan it. I think, this is probably another one of those dares. We were probably on our way to somewhere else, and we we're going past the pitch. And let's go do it. Well, now what happened, though, was the next summer after we graduated from high school. So now we're like 18. This was in summer of 1984. We then, can't remember if we had to get permission or if we just did it, but we went back to that pitch, but it's now summertime. And we were there like on Saturday night, and we were doing big shows. And, we were doing maybe a 15-minute show, maybe 20-minute. We'd have like probably 3 5-minute routines, but then we'd pad it out with gathering the crowd, and we'd probably do 3, 4, 5 shows a night. But we were just there to meet girls and hang out, and just because this was just like, it's summer and let's just hang out and have a great time. And it was actually really easy to pull a crowd, and we were making money.
Did you see the work you were doing in the improv classes feeding into doing the street work, and was there some kind of crosstalk between the two things?
Completely. John Lear, my partner, to this day, he's still a TV actor, and he's been in lots of sitcoms, and he's done improv and things. And so he had his solo shows in these competitions in high school, and I had my solo shows, and we did our team stuff together. But both of us were just...
Did you notice the difference between the solo shows that he did and the solo shows that you did? Because obviously when you're together, you develop a style which is synchronizing between the two of you. But was there a distinct difference between the two bits of work? Or had you developed a very similar style together?
The style we developed together was from... it had nothing to do with our solo presentations. It was all about these improvised things. We had like won first place 7 times, where we've got a half hour to prepare something, let's go do it. So we had that confidence that we'd be we did sound effects, we did funny voices, we did characters, and we were doing that in our street shows from the beginning. Like one of the things I remember, I would juggle a bowling ball, and I'd pull out the bowling ball, and then all of a sudden I'd go into like a TV presenter talking about the qualities of this fabulous bowling ball. You want to get this bowling ball, da, da, da. And so those kind of characters and weirdness was just always at the forefront of what we wanted to do.
Well, that sounds like a great way to start, is you're actually applying a lot of stagecraft and character work and actorly skill instead of just going out there, excuse me, sorry, instead of just going out there with a set of clubs and hoping and relying on the clubs to hold the people there.
Yeah, completely. And I can remember over the years, several times I've met up with like jugglers from the Moscow circus or jugglers from here, there, whatever, just like the very best you've ever could imagine. And I've seen them try to work the street. Like one of the times I can really remember was in Australia. And I was doing lots of shows, and we ended up meeting one of the, and this was like the Soviet Union was still pretty tied up at that time. It was like, whoa, are we actually allowed to talk to this Russian, that sort of thing? And he came down and watched us on the street, and he had to go on the street. And it breaks my heart when I see someone with that kind of talent with the audience just walking by and ignoring them, because the audience just doesn't care.
It's a different kind of talent though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a athletic. Well, this is how where I always look at it. You've got an athlete and you've got an entertainer, and if you're an incredibly capable juggler, technical juggler, you're an athlete. Whereas somebody who's a good entertainer with 1 ounce of your athletic capability can mine that far greater than you could with 1 ounce of entertaining ability.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And you sort of hinted at this earlier of, well, what happened when I came from America and I had this background of Las Vegas, it's flashy, it's Johnny Carson, we got our 5-minute set, and you've only got 5 minutes on that stage, it better be good and packed. And I came in with that style and that sort of background, and all of a sudden here was Covent Garden. And I was seeing people who would take 45 minutes to do one trick. They'd take 20, 30 minutes standing around doing nothing, and the whole audience is going, why are we all watching? He's doing nothing. And the audience is getting bigger and bigger while nothing is happening. And it took me a few weeks or months even to appreciate what was going on. But I think that was like one of the best things I learned about being in Covent Garden. And then I started looking at the American performers.
Why did you leave? Did you set up a kind of career? Were you working as a street performer for quite some time in America before you went to Covent Garden?
So I went to the University of Kansas for 2 years, and I was being sensible, and I was going to just take my general studies. I knew I wanted to be a performer, but I just didn't have the confidence that I could make a living at it. But while I was doing that, I then started getting more and more into the idea of performing. So I took a year out. And during that year out, I went back to the Renaissance Festival and worked solo for a year. And so got a lot more stagecraft behind me. And I was doing big shows and making good. So this is at the age of 20. And I was doing big solo shows and juggling fire and passing the hat and all that at the Renaissance Festival. But then I also started going to like Boulder, Colorado. And I'd pop up to Boulder for a day or two in the summer. Just because I wanted to see it. There's like so few pedestrian places in America, and Boulder was one of them. And I saw people like Johnny Fox, Sword Swallower, and Air Jazz. And so I had that all behind me. And as well as that, during that year, I took a year off from university when I was working comedy clubs. And so I went to the open mic night. There were 2 comedy clubs in Kansas City by that time. So there was a whole year where I paid my dues. Every single Monday, I was at one club. Every single Tuesday, I was at the other for the entire year. Well, 4, 5, 6 months into that, I'm getting gigs at these clubs or getting gigs around the state and stuff. So when I went back to university for a year, then did drama. I went, okay, now I'm doing dance. Now I'm doing drama. I took ballet. I went full on into ballet because of Air Jazz and that influence from them. And
so I suppose I have to ask here who Air Jazz are.
Yeah, so air jazz is a trio. John and Peter and Keziah are their names. They did at that time they did a big off-Broadway run, and they also appeared on the Tonight Show. And they were really technical jugglers, but they blended everything with dance and movement, physicality, and they were just like as slick as you can get. They were big stars at the IJA conventions and things like that. And I saw them performing in Boulder. I was really lucky. Twice I went to Boulder, and I found out later that only one day a year would they do a street show. You know, because they're big theater stars and stuff. But one day a year they'd go out in their hometown, so their mates could come see them, and they could just enjoy the summertime. And I happened to be there you know, when they were on the street, and I saw what they were doing on the street, and all this slick professionalism. But and you know, the biggest thing I think I took from that is just composure and holding yourself with confidence and prowling in the stage and owning it, owning the space even when you haven't pulled a crowd yet. All is coming from that dance training. It was completely because I wanted to be like air jazz.
Well, there's an interesting thing. I've watched a guy who works in London quite a lot, who's an ex-Russian ballet dancer. Not the nicest human being ever, but one of the things I noticed from his work is his understanding of the line of the body and how to make something appear dynamic and how to give an amount of force and communication with the way he held his body. So I assume doing ballet gave you a similar thing. It gave you an understanding of the way the body moves and the way you can communicate a sense of self, a sort of internal feeling with that.
Yeah, yeah. I see Brian Winling has just put into the comments that Peter Davidson is the guy from Air Jazz, who actually, I think he performed ballet as well. One time I was in Boulder, and he was doing a ballet performance somewhere. I don't know if they're still together, but they were the nicest people, and they used to like run the juggling club at the University of Colorado, and I got to hang out with them and practice. And, you know, big props to Brian Winling, going back again, is that he was just the kindest guy of teaching me and the other young jugglers. He'd just come and hang out with us and just learning from the nicest people. And all these amazing people I met were so welcoming and helpful. And then Lee Ross is saying, Peter went on to become the director of the Boulder Ballet for many years. Wow, okay.
So I think that could be a confirmation that, yes, he did do ballet.
Yeah.
And so you've done your studying, you've done dance, you began to learn how to hold yourself. How do you apply this then after that? Do you go back onto the street, back into the clubs?
Okay. Well, so what was happening in the story here is that I did that year back in the University of Kansas where I was gigging all the time and going to theater classes in the day, but I was gigging as well. And there was a guy at that time named Stevie G. I don't know what's happened to Stevie, but he was from Lawrence, Kansas, where the University of Kansas is. And at that time, he worked at the Renaissance Festival as well. And his mother still lived in Lawrence, and he'd come back from Europe, and he'd have spent Europe traveling around over the summer and come back. And I can remember Stevie saying to me, he was just like, Rex, you got to get out of Kansas, man. You got to go check out the world. There's so many cool things happening over there in Europe. And it planted the seed, and I wanted to go do that and see what was happening. Another thing that happened, 1987, January 87, was the first Buskers Fest in Key West, Florida, that Will Soto organized. And there was no internet back then. So how did I find out about this? Was Juggler's World magazine, you know? So you get this printed thing 4 times a year, and in it was this little ad. Are you a juggler? Are you a performer? Do you want to come to the Key West Buskers Fest? Send us your resume. And I somehow got hired for it. I had a 3-day car journey to get there. And, but I met some amazing people. The most important one that I met though was Gazzo. And Gazzo also was sort of holding court one night at a party at Bounce the Clown, and Mademoiselle Ooh La La had a house with like a deck and a hot tub. And one night there was a big party of all the street performers there. And I was just hanging out and talking to Gazzo. And Gazzo was just like the legend. Every single performer there was just awestruck by how good Gazo was, technically and performance-wise. And me too, of course. And I'd never heard of Gazo before, but I saw his shows. And here I'm listening to him, and he was telling me about London. He was telling me about Chris de Piss. And I can just remember the phrase Chris de Piss and just the outrageousness of the things. And Gazo would be going, like, this is like Gazo being so unbelievably good himself, and yet he was in awe of the audacity and the bravery and the craziness that Chris Lynham would do. And I was like, whoa, I want to see that kind of thing. And so I wanted to go to Europe. And I was a good boy. My mother, in fact, my mother's probably watching too. Hey, Mom. But before I carry on, I have to say, just like going back to watching television with my mom and watching Saturday Night Live and all that kind of stuff, my mom always was so supportive of me, like through all the speech competitions and the school plays. And even when I was, 16 years old, and like most parents are going, you can't go to the club, you got to be 21 to be in. My mom was like, yeah, do it. And she was like so supportive all along. But I wanted to be a good boy. And I couldn't just say to my mom, I'm going to go be a vagabond and travel around Europe, although that's what I wanted to do. But I couldn't say that to my mom. And there was a poster up at the university that said, study abroad for a year. And I thought, hang on, I could go to England for a year, and I could go to Europe in the summer before and after. And so that was my plan. And so I told my mom, hey, Mom, it's the university. It's a official program. I'm going to be doing that. And me knowing, hang on, I'm going to be going all over the place, checking out the bohemian lifestyle.
And so did you feel excited, apprehensive? Were you confident that it'd be okay?
I think I can remember there was a time early on when I was like, well, am I going to be able to afford this? How expensive is London going to be? Am I going to run out of money? Am I going to go home after a few months, like embarrassed? And the truth is I did well, and I made money, and I worked at Covent Garden, and I made lots of money in Edinburgh. But I at first I was, but I was also just absolutely loving it.
What was your experience of England when you get off the plane and you're spending your first few days in the country?
So everywhere I went in Europe, and I would tell people, yeah, I'm a performer, I'm on my way to England. Everywhere, everyone knows Covent Garden is the place to go. And they would all just say, you got to go to Covent Garden. And it was like that when I was in Kansas City, and I was doing like solo street shows, like when I was 19, 20 on the street in Kansas City. It used to wind me up that everyone would go, you need to go to San Francisco. You need to go to San Francisco. And I'm like, why don't you want me here? Why don't I need to go to San Francisco? You're some people. I'm a performer. Isn't it good enough here? But the same thing was happening about, you got to go to Covent Garden. And it's true. And so, of course, I was going to go there first day. And I did. And I met Nick Nicholas, like either the first or the second day. And Nick was just like the biggest star. I've got the greatest thankfulness to him, being a mate, being someone who, like, as soon as I showed up, the thing was, Nick had already spent like a year in America at that time. And he had it very much in his head that, hey, people looked after me while I was in America. Here's this American guy, mate, it's my turn. I'm going to look after you. And so, like, my first day down at Covent Garden, Nick invites me back to his place in Hackney, and he takes me to the bagel shop on Brick Lane, and he's showing me around, and he's telling me stories, and it's like, actually what happened was I spent like 2-3 days in London before going to Edinburgh. And so I was going to spend all of August up in Edinburgh before I had to start my university, Middlesex Poly I was at, which started in September, but I was in London a few days and then Edinburgh for a month. And Nick prepared me for Edinburgh. And he told me everything about Edinburgh, what to expect. And I also got to say, my friend John Lear had been to Edinburgh before as well. So I'd heard about Edinburgh a couple of years before that, because John was into improv, and his improv teacher at university was a guy named Dan Patterson, who created Whose Line Is It Anyway? And so John had been over, And then, so John had been to Edinburgh like a student group with Dan Patterson directing him and stuff. And when I showed up in London as well, John arranged for me to meet up with Dan Patterson. He took me to the cinema one night. And so I'm meeting cool people from day one. But the thing that I really remember best, though, about going to Edinburgh is that Nick had told me all about Paddy Bramwell's and John Chappell and the Cool Shades show. And he was like, yeah, my roommate, Paddy, he's up in, that's why I had a place to stay. I was probably sleeping in Paddy's bed in Hackney. And then, but Nick was saying, you got to see my mates. And I got up to Edinburgh, straight off the train, walked over to the Mound, and there are John and Paddy doing a show. And it's still one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. There was a guy dressed up as a giant hamburger, the Mr. Whippy hamburger, Mr. Wimpy, yeah. And so I'd never even heard of this chain of hamburgers before. But here's a giant hamburger who's got the bravery to walk into the middle of their pitch while they're doing a monster show. And these guys are dressed like the guys out of what's the movie? The Clockwork Orange. They're dressed like punks from Clockwork Orange. And they have this big plastic bat. Mr. Wimpy walks into their pitch and they're like, Mr. Wimpy, you don't belong here. And they're beating the hell out of him with this bat. It was just like the funniest, craziest, anarchic thing. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
And did you find, you said you were successful when you came to London, you made money, but did you find when you first started doing shows that there was a culture shock in any way? Did your work translate?
There was a culture shock. So it took a while to adapt. And I think I remember Edinburgh, I did fine. I didn't have a hard time pulling crowds in Edinburgh, but I struggled at first getting a crowd at Covent Garden and learning how to work that pitch and get the edge and get a crowd in took me a little while. And part of it, I think, was the fact that the English language, you say potato and I say potato. What happens to you as an American is you come over and there's like 5 or 6 words that you say differently. And all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, are there like 100 words I say differently? And you just know that the Brits are going to take the piss out of you. They're going to make fun of you. And so then you're getting worried about it. And it took about 4, 5, 6 months to get that out of my system before I could confidently speak British.
Was there a thing as well, and I've heard this of numerous people, is that British people are quite cynical and quite sarcastic, and whereas American people tend to be a bit more sincere. Things are delivered with a kind of pride, you know, and an openness, whereas we're all, you know, self-effacing, taking the piss out of ourselves and everything else. Did that come into play?
You know, I'm trying to think about how that ended up into my show. I'm sure it did. In fact, I'm sure it did, because like all of that balletic stuff I was talking about, the posing and the presence and stuff, I would do it in such an over-the-top sort of way that I would knowingly be the over-top American. But everyone knows I'm taking the piss out of Americans. I'm doing it to wind you Brits up. I'm going to be so American and in your face. But this was coming from me hanging out in Covent Garden for a year. And I think my style was very different than it had been in America. And then when I was seeing American performers, a lot of that would wind me up. I was now being like the sarcastic Brit going, oh, damn Yanks, just calm down, mate. You know, so it rubbed off on me. And I can strongly remember after I spent a year in London, going back home and talking to my mom and telling her about London and stuff. And I was telling her, look, I felt, you know, really at home there. I felt like it was my place. And it was because of Covent Garden. It was because of all my mates there. You know.
Well, I suppose you could ask, what's the community like there then? Because it sounds like it wasn't just Nick. It was a whole community of people. Am I correct in thinking that?
Very much so. Very much so. There was a lot of performers. Some of the names I forget and stuff. A lot of them have been interviewed by you on here or going to be. Some of them are still down at Covent Garden. And but the thing at that time, I did my college. So I was Middlesex Poly. So I was at class during the weekdays, and then 2 or 3 nights a week I was going to audition at comedy clubs and things. So every Saturday and Sunday I was down there, and in a way they'd look at me and go, oh, you part-timer, you coming in on the easy days. We're tough. We're playing it through the week. You're not hardcore, Rex. But I stuck with it, because I learned to give as good as I took, and you got to learn how to take it with good natured as well. As soon as someone
What's it?
It was when people want to wind you up. So a little bit of good natured, what is the word? Just giving the guys a ribbing would be the American phrase, or taking the piss. You're having banter and you're having fun with people, and it can be laddish. And in fact, I think there's a lot of places, Covent Garden being one of them, where a community of people who know each other, then it can be hard when the newcomer comes in, and they want to test it. They want to test and see if you've got any guts about you or any backbone to you. Are you going to follow at the first sign of someone giving you a hard time or not? I knew how to fit in with whoever. Like, there were different groups. This group doesn't like that group. Same thing when I was in high school. This group doesn't like that group, but I like both of them. And the same thing for me at Covent Garden.
Why was the friction? Was it just personal things, or was there a social group friction? Was there a class thing going on?
There would be friction about someone doesn't like someone else's show for this reason or that reason, or someone overran and they're angry about it for this or that, or just the normal everyday friendship politics, work politics, like around the office politics, that kind of thing.
And how were these problems resolved in the end? Was there a drum top court? Did people turn the drum over, sit down and hold court and decide what should be done? Was there votes? Was there a mechanism for people deciding things?
Yeah, there was. And this was one of the things that impressed me most about Covent Garden, because there were so many performers who were there regularly, and also so many performers who would travel around the world and come in and out for a few days here and there. And it just really struck on me, and it struck on me even more once I started traveling the world, because I spent like the next 4 or 5 years traveling Australia, Canada, the States, whatever. But after I left Covent Garden, Andre Vincent has just put, we burnt all jugglers. Which reminds me, once I used to sort of get a crowd at the garden by shouting, "I'm going to set my hair on fire." So I'll be screaming, "I'm going to set my hair on fire. Come watch me set my hair on fire." And at that time, we had to have fire extinguishers on the pitch. And a drunk guy heard me going, "I'm setting my hair on fire," and he came over and doused me with the fire extinguisher. And so it's like, I'm just pulling the crowd in, and it's over because he's doused me, and I've just like, I've got extinguisher in my eyes and stuff and everything. But everyone sort of like came to our rescue, and like, "Rex, that's okay. It's a learning experience. It's what happens," that sort of thing. Anyway, that was Andre distracting me there a little bit. But what I wanted to...
conflict resolution was something we were talking about.
So they were talking about the fact that Covent Garden, for all its reputation for being male and maybe aggressive and that sort of thing, it was socialist to me. It was so much looking out for the common good. And it was so much, we have some rules. These rules have developed over the years, and you may or may not like the rules. In fact, none of us really like the rules, but we found out that this system is what makes it fair. And, that is not the system in America that I've ever known about. I've done very little busking in the States. I've done a lot of festivals in Canada, but in the States, I hear about New Orleans, I hear about New York City, or hear about other places where those people, like especially New York City, they are tough. They are mean people. They are aggressive. Like, this is my pitch, man. Forget it. Whereas Covent Garden was the opposite. It's like, we were all beginners once. You don't have to be good yet. You were crap once, so don't give him a hard time while he's trying to learn. And I really respected that. And I tried to, in fact, I really saw that in action around the world. So big up to Lee Ross, who was watching out there. I think Lee was the best at it in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada. I spent a lot of great times with Lee, and he especially, but I was trying to do the same thing in my own way, We're trying to spread that community and trying to encourage everyone in and making a family. And, the big shows in front of hundreds of thousands of people or whatever are not my favorite memories. My favorite memories are Sunday mornings going to the cafe in St. Kilda in Melbourne with Lee Ross and Dom and Andy and Tony Living Space, and doing that every week with my mates and seeing the same people. And then in London, going to the CAF. So the thing in London, if you don't know, you got to be there like at 8 in the morning, or whoever is the earliest, or by 8 in the morning, you got to have your name on that list, and you're not allowed to leave. And so what do? You all go to the cafe together and have breakfast. That was the time of my life when just hanging out with my mates every week. Look, I'm getting emotional about thinking about it now. It was the best.
It certainly seems when I talk to a lot of people how the cafe becomes like this social epicenter, and it's the place where people hang out, they share, they talk about what's going on in the day, how life's going. And that's what I fear you lose when you don't have a system like they have in Covent Garden, where you have a draw where everyone meets up. It becomes a hub for the performers, drawing people in to do the sign up. If you don't have that, if people just come and do their bit, if they've got a schedule, where does the community come from?
Yeah, and that when I went to places like San Francisco or Boston, I never performed at either of those places because you can't. You've got to like audition 6 months in advance, and then they give you your list of days you're going to play. You can't pass through and do it. And so I don't know. I suppose the 5 or 10 people who are on that system, they become friends with each other. Maybe not. Probably not, because they're not hanging out on the pitch all day. They come and do their shows and go, I suppose. In fact, I remember John Park saying that on his interview. And whereas Covent Garden has this thing where you gotta wait, you gotta be there, and you can't just go home. Another good story that reminded me, my one summer, I was probably coming over to play Glastonbury or Edinburgh or both, and popped into Covent Garden for a week or so. And my mother came over. And so my mother and I got a hotel room in Russell Square. And so I'm staying in a hotel in Russell Square. So it was really easy for me to walk down and put my name on the list. And at first, it's all kicked off. It's illegal. He can't do it. No way. Da, da, da. But then, of course, I knew it, even though I hadn't been there for a year or whatever. And enough of the guys knew me. It's like, it's Rex. It's only going to be here a week. Just let him. And, so I got to get a good time slot for my mom to come watch me. It's fair enough.
One of the things, just talking about this, that it came up a few minutes ago when we were talking about rules that people accept but don't like. The time slot, 45-minute time slot. I've looked a lot at people's work, particularly people like your Pepes or maybe Melvin. I didn't see him work at Melvin Altwag, Lee Ross, people who are doing interactive, playful pieces. And you think that time slot, sometimes it's a shame because the work could be so much greater given an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes for it to grow out. But the only way that you have a fair system is by having that thing. And I just thought I'd ask you, is there any thoughts you have on that?
I think that comes from the number of performers on a pitch. When we were in St. Kilda every Sunday in Australia, there were probably 5 of us on the pitch. And so it was easy enough for everyone to get in a show. Maybe someone would get in 2, But when you've got 18, 20 people showing up, or, in a regular sort of situation like that, you've got to, for the good of everyone, have to limit it a little bit. And there's a couple of things going with when you're on that other pitch, which leads me into another idea that I absolutely love, trying to make a new pitch, go somewhere that no one else has ever done it before. In fact, I'm sure it was Lee Ross who started that pitch in front of Luna Park in St. Kilda. No one would ever have had the guts to work that pitch because it was too big and expensive and too difficult. And then Lee taught us, no, it can be done. And it's like, oh, cow, how am I going to? And that Lee was such a huge inspiration for me in that sort of situation. It's like, how is he pulling that crowd in that big, sparse, open place? And part of that is taking the time and the patience. You got to have that patience to build, but then you also have to have the goods. You got to have enough material to keep working and keep going. And when you have that experience, the ability to have that energy and go for an hour or more in a pitch where no one's ever worked it before, that is like another one of my things that was just like gave me the most satisfaction. You know, you could say, oh, Covent Garden is where street performers go, and of course there's a show and you did it there, but you go into a place that has never seen a street performer before and they don't even know what it's all about, and then all of a sudden there's this wall of energy and love and amazement, and afterwards people are they just can't, it's like magic just happens. It's like a theater dropped out of the sky onto this spot, and then it disappeared, and then the audience is coming up to you going, how did you do that? What was that? And I love seeing people do that, and I love trying to do that.
It's a very special moment, isn't it? I do think sometimes in places like Covent Garden, the audience can almost take it for granted a little bit, where when you go to somewhere off the beaten track and you create that moment, it is genuinely something special in their day. They didn't expect to see that. So yeah. Rex, you said that you did a degree for a year and then you went back home. When you went back home, were you intending to come back and travel around, or you thinking to settle in America? What were your plans when you went back?
Okay, so I was supposed to go back home, and I did not. So I was supposed to be on a 4-year degree course in Kansas, and I was studying drama and dance, doing both. And so I wasn't going to complete the requirements for either because I was doing both. But why was I doing both? Because I was just picking and choosing what I wanted to do. I was doing the Rex Boyd degree course. And so I had my year in London, and I was supposed to go back to Kansas. And I had good grades and could have easily gone back and had my degree. And I went, nope. That's not it, because in my year in London, guys like Keno and Drew Franklin and whoever else went out. They went to Expo in Brisbane in Australia, and
Expo '88.
Yeah. And so they came, and so I was in London still, but they came back, and they came back with these stories. Australia, it's summer there when it's winter here. What? You can go perform there. And I was like, do I go home and go back to Kansas and cold and finish my degree? And I just, stuck in my head for 2 reasons. One, I think that, I ended up being a performer for like more than 25 years. And it was my only job, my only income. I never worried about money, and I had a good time and just went with the flow. But there was no plan for that. The plan was, how long can you go and not get a real job? And so I had, going back and finishing my degree, or let's see what Australia's like. Let's see what Canada's like. Well, in fact, I didn't even know about Canada. Because when I went to Australia, I met the checkerboard guy, David Aiken, one of the nicest, best performers, lovely, lovely, lovely guy. Love him. And he was so generous. When I met him in Australia, the Adelaide Fringe, I think, he gave me a big list of all the best street festivals in Canada. It's like, whoa, the typical American would like be guarding that. I'm not giving you this information. This is valuable stuff. And David is like, hey, come to Canada. So, I went off to Australia for a while, and then I just didn't stop. And I basically was non-stop doing fringe and street festivals for about 4 years.
And what happened to your work during this time? The show itself, did it develop and change? Did you make big movements in it? Did it become pretty stable from the beginning and stayed the same throughout that time?
The point where I can remember it changing was hanging out with Lee Ross, and watching Lee doing verbal following, watching Lee doing mime routines to music, doing his audience participation show with sound effects on the microphone and all that kind of stuff. And I actually talked Lee into selling me his old Maxi Mouse. And so
what's a Maxi Mouse?
Yeah, it's in those days, very few people had amplification on the street, but there was a company in New York City, and Lee was from New York, and it was hard to get these things, and they were expensive. And Lee had one, and Lee also had a wireless microphone. And I think he was going back to New York, and Lee would tell me if he's, oh, I know, and my mom's watching too. Hi, Mom. Yeah. And hello, David Castle as well. One of my good mates, and Andre. Yeah. So, so Lee sold me his amplifier and his wireless mic, and I immediately came up with a torch swinging dance. So I was doing this dance to the song Disco Inferno. But, you know, you're smiling, you're laughing about it already. And at that time, this was like 1990 or 91. Maybe there wasn't the disco revival yet. It wasn't hip to be kitsch about disco yet. But I was going to do it. I was going to be kitsch about disco. And so I started dancing around, just being a ridiculously over-the-top disco dancer with these fire torches.
And of course, you've done ballet, so you've got this physical awareness.
Completely. And then, but what the key was, what really set my mind for the next 10 years was I got a guy out of the audience and I made him dance with me. I made him copy my routines. So I would give him one of the fire torches. I got my fire torch. It's like, all right, mate, come on. We got to do John Travolta. Come on, do like me. Okay, now do this. Now do that. Now flip the fire torch. Now flip it between your legs. Now do da-da-da-da. And just seeing what could we play with. And, you know, it took maybe there was no rehearsal. It was just, here's an idea, go do it. And within 2 or 3 shows, I'm going, hang on. The audience likes this better than any of the things that I've been practicing for 10 years at trying to get super good at. What they like is, here's a guy from the audience and we're just being the biggest kids having the craziest time. And that's what set the ball rolling.
And I suppose at that time it was conscious. You really were thinking, I have to start working the skill sets out of the work and begin to focus on play.
Yeah, and I had a time period when I was still doing the juggling and then finishing with that Disco Inferno routine. Or I also finished with getting
so it was your finisher. It wasn't an opener volunteer routine, finishing with juggling, which is what I expected.
Well, no, this was grand finale time. This is like, you know, this is like, let's make the money. And, you know, what would happen was we'd do the torch routine or the swinging, and then I'd stop the music. And then I would get another torch and I would soak them all again. And I'd have him throw me the third torch to go into juggling 3. And I'd do loads of tricks with 3. I'd do a pirouette with 3 high up. I'd juggle all my back with 3 and catch one between my feet. And then I'd stand up and I'd light a 4th torch. And while I'm lighting the 4th torch, that's when the hat lines come. So I had a really smooth, big, and I'm catching my breath. There's sweat going everywhere. I've been dancing like mad and juggling fire torches like mad for the last 10 minutes. And I'm catching my breath while I'm doing my hat line. And then I would juggle 4 torches to finish. And I'd do a pirouette with 2 high on the 4 torch juggle.
Not bad. And what's quite nice with that is you're doing the thing that I think is always a really good pointer for people who are beginning, is transitions are the death of a show. You know, having these clunky movements from one piece to the next piece really is the death of energy. Whereas if you have everything flowing into each other, if something's picked up as...
Oh, very much so. I mean, even in my juggling show, that flow went from a 3-4-5 ball routine into the club routine, into the machete sickle hammer routine, into the fire torches. And so it was like a progression. We're going to up it. We're going to up it. And I did other juggling routines over the years as well, but then it was a matter of let's drop anything that doesn't have the gags. If it doesn't have the gags, then goodbye. I'm not carrying that pop around. And but develop. You're right. That flow, definitely.
And so when you start doing the dancing routines with the fire with the people, do you start trying to package and rebrand what you're doing, or is it more gradual?
Well, one of my publicity photos from that time was the Saturday Night Fever album cover with my face on it, and it's still out there on the internet somewhere. But that photo was up in lots of comedy clubs and the occasional, you know, street gig or whatever that I would do. And so, yeah, the branding, the marketing at that time. So I absolutely, you know, cherish the days when I never bothered with trying to get a gig. I was absolutely very happy and loved the fact that I could just show up in a city I'd never been in and just start making money. But then, of course, you think long term, what's the next level? And, you naturally go, well, if I'm getting paid, then that's a good thing. If I'm getting paid more than I could make on the street, that's a good thing. If I'm getting paid to play a festival where I'm going to show up and there's just going to be 1,000 people waiting on the pitch, even though it's a street environment, that's a good thing. But, those are things that are your goals as you go along. But then just year by year, it becomes more and more about the promotion, about the work, about the connections, about the phone calls, all that kind of stuff. And it is what it is.
And there was a little bit, which I think maybe we might move past at this point. So I'd reference now, we talked a little bit before the interview about the alternative comedy circuit. And I've chatted to a few people about this because it kind of doesn't exist in my era. And the thing I asked you about was, do you think that alternative comedy got swallowed by stand-up? And I suppose before we even just talk about that, you were involved in the alternative comedy circuit in London when you were there. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So this was 1988. And like I was saying, I came over to be a student, really, but not really. What I really was doing was I chose London for one reason. I could have gone anywhere else in the UK, but I insisted on London because I thought it's a big city. They speak English. I have worked in comedy clubs. There must be some opportunities. And I was right. There were. There was a big scene, the alternative comedy scene, which started up, I guess, the early 80s. And this is the late 80s, and it's happening. But it was so different than the American comedy club scene. The American comedy club scene started maybe the early mid 70s. So like a 10-year progression ahead of what was happening in the UK. And it blew my mind in London that I would go to a comedy club and there would be, it was more like what you would think an old vaudeville night was like. Here is just some weird act. You have no idea what the hell's going on. Or here is a musician, or here is this or that. And at that time, there were lots of gigs like that. In fact, I don't think there were any proper stand-up only gigs that I can remember. When I came back to the UK, because I was on the road for all those years, and I came back in 1994. By 1994, Eddie Izzard had become big, and Skinner and Baddiel and the other people had become big on the television. And all of a sudden, the people with the money focus came in, and it became more of a, well, we want stand-ups because stand-ups can translate to television easier. And we want this because we're a bit snooty and we think we're better. But in 88, the thing that was just suited me so much was that it was not just stand-up, that it was anything, anarchy, craziness. And, met a lot of great people. A lot of street performers were working indoors as well.
Did you have a situation when you came back in 94 and the place you'd enjoyed to play in the alternative comedy scene wasn't as welcoming or open? Was it problematic for you when you returned?
Sort of well, yes, but what happened in opposite respect was, I spent a year building up contacts and getting gigs. And when I came back, that was like, it meant nothing. I came back 4 years later, 5 years later, and I was so much better. And but yeah, we never heard of you, or even places that had heard of me. It's like, I don't care, mate. You got to start at the beginning again. Come on, you got to. And so I had to completely start from scratch with one exception. And that one exception, I've got great, great respect for him today. A legendary guy named Malcolm Hardy. And Malcolm Hardy ran a place called Up the Creek. And before that, it was the Tunnel Club. And Malcolm Hardy sadly passed away quite a few years ago, but he is just one of the absolute legends of anarchy and craziness. He and Chris Lynham did stuff together all the time. That I saw the two of them performing in Montreal just for laughs, and the two of them are naked on stage, and the Canadians just haven't got. They're just shocked. They're so shocked by it. And the weird thing for me was like I've been hanging out with these guys in London. I knew it was going to happen. But when I came back, Malcolm Hardy was the only person who 4 years later went, yeah, I remember you. We'll get you a gig. You're all right. That was it. It was just like a 2-minute conversation and I'm booked. Everybody else, it was back to taking 6 months, a year. In the case of jongleurs, that was a tough gig to get because of two reasons. One, at that time, there were only 3 comedy clubs, but that jongleurs owned, and they were in London. And there were a lot of really, really good top quality acts playing them. So anybody new was like going to have a hard time. But what finally got me in there after about 5 years of going it, so from 94 until about 99, I was constantly like banging on the door at jongleurs. And then they overnight started booking all these gigs at Butlins. And they overnight, I had like one phone call that gave me like 20 well-paying gigs that jongleurs was booking at Butlins. And I was doing the Robin Hood show in there. And the Robin Hood, there's no way in hell that jongleurs ever would have given me a chance to audition with the Robin Hood show, my audience participation show. But the fact that they had these other gigs, and I was like, I don't care. I'm going to do what I know is going to be the better show anyway. And then they're like, Rex, we've been getting good reports that you're the best actor on the bill at this Robin Hood show. Do you want to come do it at jongleurs? And I was like, yeah. So of course after.
This is a big move, though. The Robin Hood show is a big move because you were doing the fire dancing piece. Did you not come back to London and start doing the fire dancing piece as a 10-minute piece on the stage?
Well, I jumped ahead a little bit. So yeah, I was right up until the end of my career, and I retired about 11 years ago. 2010, I retired. So right up to the end, I was still doing the juggling show. And I was doing stand-up, and I was doing walkabout characters, and I was doing the Robin Hood show, and I was also doing a Western show. So I had a lot of different things to keep me from getting bored, number one, to be able to do at a venue that I can went back to, number two, that sort of thing. But when I came back to London in 94, I set in my mind that we're going to have a winter in Covent Garden. And this is legendary. If you're a street performer who has done a winter in Covent Garden, you want to brag about it, rightfully so, because it is tough. And if you can survive that, all of a sudden March comes along, April comes along, the weather's nice, and you're doing the exact same thing. And holy cow, there's big crowds. And these things that I was struggling through are now becoming easy. And I knew that was going to happen. And so on purpose, I thought, I do not want to struggle through my top material in the winter. I'm just going to make myself depressed. So rather than doing the juggling, I went, nope, I'm doing this new show, and I'm gonna premiere it in January, and getting 3 volunteers out of an audience that only consists of like 10 or 15 people is not easy, and I did it.
So did you kind of set yourself up an inauguration of fire, so to speak? I'm going to write this new show in the hardest possible circumstances, and when it comes out of that, it's going to be bulletproof and made of titanium.
Completely. And that's exactly what happened. It worked exactly much better than I could have expected. And
so how did you write it to begin with? How did you develop the concept before you went into actually applying it?
Probably in October or so of that year. This is 1994. Phone call to my buddy Lee Ross. Props to Lee Ross again. And Lee Ross is famous for his show where he'd do a Western and get 3 people out, and he'd narrate on the mic. And I always loved that. And then Pepe Mime. Pepe is a mate of mine. I've traveled with him all over the world, had some crazy fun times with him. And I absolutely adored, as did anyone who ever saw Pepe on the street in like the early 90s, would just go, not bettered, just not bettered anywhere. And Pepe silently would get 3 people to act out a story. Another guy that I traveled with a lot, Drew Franklin. And Drew Franklin was also mates with Pepe. And Pepe helped Drew write his audience participation piece. And so those 3 guys, but that inspired me. And I'm going, this is the kind of thing I want to do. I want an audience participation piece. And I rang up Lee and I was like, Lee, can you help me brainstorm? And he's like, okay, so you live in England now. Why don't you do something like, I don't know, King Arthur? That was Lee's idea. And I was like, okay. And I thought about King Arthur for about, after I got off the phone, I thought about it for maybe a half hour before I went, no, it's Robin Hood. And at that time, it was a few years after the Kevin Costner movie was big. And that song, Everything I Do for You, was just like
longest number one. Yeah.
The longest number one. So, but it didn't take me long to go, wait a second, we are having a kiss at the end of this story to Everything I Do for You. There's the finale. All I got to do is pad it out with 20 minutes. And that finale rocked. It was that song, the emotion and the laughter and the strength in that finish was so amazing. But what happened next was me spending more time with Pepe. I went to Pepe's house and hung out with Pepe for the weekend. We went walking around the woods near his house. We were probably pretending to be Robin Hood out in the woods. And Pepe is insightful. He knows theater craft. He knows the psychology of people. He knows what will work. And he wrote and gave me 4, 5, 6 gags. And we were just like talking through, well, what happens next? Well, then the girl does this, and then the guy does that. And Pepe coached me. He helped me do it. And yeah, and so just getting the props together, my wife, she hand sewed the hats, a hat for the sheriff, a hat for Maid Marian, for Robin Hood, getting the props and things together, getting the music together, and thinking through all these things was like, I was thinking about it all of November, December, and then like January, February, working it out at Covent Garden.
And so what was the first time you worked it? How did it go? Did it fall apart at the seams the first time you tried to apply it, or did it work as you imagined it? I
can just remember, like one of the most vital things to do in an audience participation show is to have a good selection of people in the audience, because you can't just choose anybody. You got to look at people who are enjoying themselves, people who look like the right type of, let's say, a stereotype of a character. I might get a fat, mean-looking guy to be the sheriff. I might get, this type of woman or that type of woman. I might play against the stereotype. I'm not necessarily going for the young, pretty girl. I might get the older woman who wants to pretend she's young and pretty and whatever. But when you have a lot of people to choose from, it also means that if one of your volunteers bails on you, you can get a replacement in. Well, the first few times I'm doing this in Covent Garden, there's only like 10, 15 people in the audience anyway. And it's like, oh my God, my audience has been cut in half because half of them are on stage with me. And, but somehow I managed to like just pump it out, just make it finish. And, that was probably really good training for me, because all the years later when I'm playing in comedy clubs, I had the same sort of situation, the same sort of, wait a second, this is not a street show. I'm getting paid a lot of money tonight. And there are 300 or 400 people who will kill me if that show, well, they're going to boo me off, and it's like going to be the biggest disaster if this show doesn't go right. So,
and it's also because in the comedy club, you're doing something that's a slightly different flavor than everything else. So they make a judgment of whether they're going to go with you with it or not. That
played actually in a reverse psychology way, that played in my favor. And everyone thinks that. The other stand-ups definitely think that. What the hell is going on? He's being a clown. He's getting people dancing around. How is this happening? And people who want to come in and think, oh, we're here sophisticated for stand-up, they're thinking this one thing, and they're getting hit blindsided by this completely different thing happening. But the only reason I could pull it off was just absolute confidence and courage that I can't, accepting the fact that I could fail means I won't fail. You just accept it. You just go, this is it. Just the positive energy that is going to make this happen somehow. And, if you were a silent mime doing this, I don't think you could pull it off in the same way in a comedy club scenario. Because I'm on the mic and because I can talk my way through to the audience and talk my way through to the psychology of the volunteers. luckily, it was few and far between that I would struggle, but I had the ability to pull it out and somehow get through and at least make it acceptable somehow.
And you put that down to the winter in Covent Garden.
Oh, completely. And yeah.
So when it came to spring, did the show kill?
It did. I was doing a lot of verbal following, and I was getting good at it. And another thing that happened was while I was in London that year, I ended up doing theater sports classes every week. And I knew about...
What's theater sports?
Yeah, theater sports is a big worldwide thing that started in Canada, or 70s or 80s, I guess. And I knew about it from Kansas City. I knew about it early on. In a lot of cities in the States, it's called comedy sports, theater sports. Comedy sports is kind of a ripoff of theater sports, but it's competitive improv. And so they have improv games where teams are competing against each other in a pseudo competition. It's really just a fun show. But it's skills of thinking on your feet. This is the scenario. You're that character, that other person's that character. Now go. You just have to like play with each other. And so that my brain got good at it. And so that was making the verbal following really good. And just funny ideas would just pop into your head because you got to just say the first thing that comes to your mind. And if John Lear is listening out there, he'll know he was the expert of that, of improv, the god of improv.
And so do you see that as like a muscle? You're training a muscle for quick creative thought?
Yes, very much so. And, that muscle, I 11 years now that I've been retired, I still get people asking me, oh, why don't you just do a show? Can you go do a show? And I think back to the days when I was at my best. If I would go on holiday for a week, the first show or two back were not kicking like they should. A little gear happens, you're just not in the flow of it. And some of the best shows I ever had were, for a few years, I would be doing street gigs in the daytime. So I might do 2-3 shows on the street, hop in my car and drive 2-3 hours to get on stage at a comedy club like at 10 o'clock at night. And I'm absolutely exhausted. And I have no idea where the energy is coming from, but it's just autopilot. And then all of a sudden, you're just not even thinking, you're not worrying, you're just going, boom. And it is that muscle memory. It is that exercising your mind and your body. But I decided when I retired that I wasn't going to go back, because I didn't want to go back and disappoint people. Didn't want to be half capable.
It's fair enough. And one of the things that I think I'd like to touch on before we start working through the chronology again is you mentioned about picking the right person. Is that kind of like you become a casting director?
Yeah. In the street, but even more so in the comedy clubs, I would have to scout the audience. So in the comedy clubs, most of the time I was the closing act. And while the other acts were on stage, I would be watching the audience and I'd be looking through, and I would look for people that are laughing. I would look for people that look nice. You're never going to pick. There's this really weird thing that especially British people have. They think that the greatest thing is when a comedian tears apart a heckler. You find someone who's horrible and you just tear them apart. And there's this misconception. And I don't think, I've never believed it. That's not what audiences want. What they really want, and what really, really works and really, really makes the show magical, is when you can be persuasive to someone who was a little bit shy, a little bit uncertain, and I can build them up, and I can make this moment like easily the best day of their year, if not maybe even of their life, because maybe they'd never been on a stage in front of 300-400 people before. And it was also very, especially when I was on a comedy club stage, I would be on the mic, I would come down off the stage and I'd have the volunteers on the stage, but I was off the stage with my back to the audience, and my full attention on those volunteers, and the show was about them. And I think that is a reason why the stand-ups who you would think would be really cynical about me, you think, oh, stupid street performer. I can't believe the street performer is closing the show. I can't believe, that we have to put up with this. This is supposed to be a proper comedy club. I never got that. I mean, they may have said that behind my back, but they never said it to me. The comedy comedian, groups and people that I was working with were always nice to me. And I think part of it was because my ego was not about, oh, watch me, I'm going to go be the greatest actor of the night. It was, watch these three people that I took from the audience and look how amazing these three people are. And I think Lee Ross would agree with me that Lee always had philosophy in my head about just letting go of your ego, letting go of expectations. And there was definitely a few years when I was just going, this show is not me anymore. This show is about those people, and those people becomes, is it about everybody in the room? It's about building that magical moment. It's not about that joke you wrote. It's not about how well you can juggle. It's about, can we be people having a great time together, making each other feel good?
Well, I think that's the thing that people miss out sometimes when people are performing pantomime, is that the audience is engaged in empathy at all times. They're looking at the people in front of them, and their brain is interpreting how that person feels and feeling that vicariously. And so, like you said, if you're going to heckle and put somebody down, it might show power and they can empathize with you being powerful. But when you get people out for a pantomime, you want to watch someone start off nervous. You feel that nervousness and then bring them through to a point of jubilation and of contentment out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm thinking now of, some of the best examples I've ever seen of that with Tony Campbell, Anthony Living Space, when he would get guys out of the audience to strip down to their underwear. And Tony has and had the patience, and he wouldn't care how long it would take. And he would somehow have that persuasiveness. And, it could take 10 minutes of everyone going, is he not? Is he not? And you'd think the audience would walk away. And then all of a sudden the guy is down in his underwear. The two of them, they're prancing around looking like complete fools. And it's now the funniest thing you've seen in your life.
You've took them on a journey. You've had that exact thing. So let's pull it back to the chronology. So you've made the Robin Hood show. You've worked it through the winter. You've brought it out in the spring, and I assume you work it, and we're kind of out of chronology, but I think it's clear enough. So then you work it in the spring, and I assume you work it first on the street, and it later moves onto the stage. So after you start working it, you realize it works. What do you do with it? How do you advance yourself and your career with this new show?
Yeah, it was a really amazing time that progressed. All the cards were lined up right for me. It just sailed through. Of March, the shows are starting to get good, and I already had a season booked in Canada. I was going, so this is summer '95 now, and so I was going to do Edmonton. I was going to do some other festivals. I think I might have been doing a festival or two in the States, but these gigs had booked me for my juggling show. They didn't know about the Robin Hood show. And I even had a comedy club gig where I had, this was early on in the summer, like one of the first gigs I did, like in June when I showed up for the North America tour. I had 3 nights in a comedy club. And I set myself the challenge because it's like, well, here's this club. It's in Wisconsin. I'm never going to play this club again in my life. They don't even know who I am. The booker knew me and they booked me. But if I fail, it's not going to make a bit of difference to my career in the UK. And so I did 3 nights where I did a different show each night. And so I tried out the Robin Hood show for the first time. And then I did a juggling show one night and a different juggling show the other night, did, the Disco Inferno, and did another music routine and stuff. But having the ability, if I had not had that gig in Wisconsin, I probably would never have had the courage or the opportunity to try the Robin Hood show on a comedy club stage. I don't think any booker in their right mind would have booked me for it. But I didn't ask. I just went and did it. And just like I said with jonglers, I took 5 years of them seeing my juggling show before they booked me for a gig. And then I went and did the Robin Hood show instead of the show they'd watched me for 5 years. And because I had done it in Wisconsin and I came back to London and I had all these comedy club gigs, same story. I've gone, I'm not doing the juggling tonight. I'm doing this thing, like it or not. But I had so much confidence because it was working so much better.
You said you were headlining a lot of the gigs, and I can imagine that being a brilliant headline piece, but you can't have been headlining to begin with. Was that problematic, doing this big, different piece with lots of volunteers, and then somebody has to go on and do stand-up again, traditional stand-up again after that?
Well, it's going to make me sound big-headed, but I can remember times like I had a good, I don't know, 6 or 8 years when I was in with a big agency called Off the Curb. And so Off the Curb was booking one of the first big comedy clubs in Birmingham called the Glee Club. And so I wasn't in with jonglers yet, but I was in with Glee Club and I was in with Off the Curb. And so I was doing lots of gigs for them. But I can remember like the first month or two, the Glee Club was even a club. And it was like, the audiences are really excited, and this is a big room and it's a new thing, and comedy's new and exciting. And I would have been on in the middle of the act because of course we're going to have a stand-up, and they couldn't follow it because I just destroyed the energy of a room for a stand-up because, in two sides. One, the show is going so well, but it also ruins the audience's ability to concentrate. It is not the kind of thing that a stand-up wants to follow. But I'm booked, and I'm like, it was not my problem. But I didn't go on in the middle for very long. I then almost always closed after that.
Well, it seems like an unintentionally shrewd move to create a show which naturally headlines. It's best suited to being a headlining piece.
Yes and no. There's that word headlining that, especially in an American comedy club, has a different connotation because you'll be getting paid a lot more money. An American comedy club, compared to the MC does 15 minutes. He's probably the local guy, the new guy. I did loads of that when I was starting out. And then the middle guy, he's doing 30 minutes and he's wishing he was doing 45 because the guy doing 45 minutes, who's the headliner, has probably been on TV a few times and he's getting paid double the money and he's getting the prestige and his name is on the poster outside. But in the UK circuit, even though everyone started using the word headline act, I don't think the UK circuit ever developed into that. And partly it's because a lot of the best acts, especially in London, would be doing 2 or 3 shows a night. And so, you got someone who's just so good, everyone wants to book him, but he's already got 2 gigs tonight. You've got to put him on first so he can hop in the taxi and go off to his next gig. And so, yes, I was headlining, but I guess I would have been on the same money as everybody else. But the pressure side of it is, well, what if the guys I've been following are super good? And in fact, especially on the big comedy clubs, they were. I worked with a lot of really top acts and acts who've gone on to be multimillionaire famous stand-ups and all. And I would be following them, but there is some pressure there. But I think it goes back to me just going, it's not me. It's just let go. Just trust 100%.
And this thing with I mentioned a little bit earlier about being a casting director, you're looking for people who are having fun, but you kind of touched upon the idea that you're looking for people with a certain look. Are you trying to? Because I often think this with doing verbal following is that you're trying to play to the prejudices of your crowd.
Yeah, very, very much so. And people know those stereotypes, and they know the stereotype of, what does the dashing hero look like? How does he stand? What does the pretty girl look like? How does she stand? And what does the bad guy do? And these are things that little kids do when they're playing. And this is clowning. And it's inbuilt nature to play with those stereotypes and play up those stereotypes, I guess. So, you know, I would love it when I would get a guy who just looked a big, mean biker looking kind of guy with tattoos, and like, I'm a little skinny guy, and yet I am like, you know, pushing around this big, huge guy that any other situation, if I'd met him on the street, I'd be scared to talk to him, scared to go next to him. But now, because we're clowning, he's like my buddy, and he thinks it's funny too. And he might play around and you know, and he might play himself up by being very effeminate, or he might play himself up by starting to beat me up in a funny way, whatever, you know. But that's where the fun comes from.
And how long was it from creating the Robin Hood show, working it, testing it out in the comedy club, bringing it back, realizing you can work it on the stand-up sets? Sorry, it's pissing down with rain here, so it's quite noisy on the mic. How long was it until it became established? Because I've read wonderful things reported about the show, and I think it did become a very well-known thing at one point. You know, it was something which was respected within the industry. Is that fair to say?
Well, so it was written that winter '95, and like I said, it took off at these festivals in Canada in summer of '95. It was probably, I don't know, 96 or 97, I suppose, when I did all those gigs at Butlins for jongleurs, and those were actually really good gigs. And you know, a lot of the for people who don't know, Butlins is a very working class place to go on holiday, and a lot of people would look down upon the type of person that wants to go there on holiday. And there also to this day, there is a certain style of comedian who tells jokes and who is very old-fashioned and is a mainstream comedian. And this is so different from anything I ever did, and so different from the stand-up circuit. But yet we were hired by jongleurs to go in there and become new. And while their parents were off in the big room watching some old-fashioned comedian with a bow tie, the younger people were all in this other room. But we'd have crowds of 400 people in there in a really raucous, rowdy, high energy environment. They were awesome shows. You know, so I was doing that all of that summer, and then it just carried on. I suppose jongleurs expanded about 98, 99, 2000, something like that. And so at that time, they went from 3 clubs in London to being 21 or 22 clubs. And so half of my year was working for jongleurs, and the other half was smaller clubs, other big clubs, or street gigs, or walkabout gigs, or whatever. But I had a good 10 years from 2000 to when I retired in 2010, where jongleurs was my meat and bones. I didn't have to look for work. They'd give me one phone call, and then there's half the year booked. And it was good. It was steady. And I was being a dad, raising 3 kids, and you know, especially when my kids were young, I could be at home with them all day, and we'd have supper, and I'd hop in the car like about 7 o'clock. I'd be on stage at 10 somewhere. I'd be back home at midnight, and did that for 10 years or more.
But it sounds like you managed to avoid one of the most difficult things with people working in that environment is getting the work and trying to rustle up the gigs.
Yeah, I was lucky, and I'm grateful. I enjoyed working at jongleurs for all of the bad sides of it. There's plenty. If you talk to most stand-ups, they'll have plenty of reasons why they didn't like it. The reasons they don't are all the reasons why it worked for me. And that was big groups of office workers, or big groups of stag nights or hen nights, big groups of people who've never seen comedy before, big groups of people who just want to get drunk and be with their friends. They are now being a bit annoyed that they have to watch a comedy show. There was a lot of that. But my show...
There's a thing of focus, right? Is that you've worked on the street, you've worked in an environment that is like that, where there isn't directed focus tunneling straight into you, where it's demanded that you pay attention to the work.
So completely. So that, to me, this goes back to that winter in Covent Garden or just anywhere in the streets, just all my years on the streets, showing up in a place that has never seen a performer and demanding that respect and demanding that attention was the same sort of attitude that I would carry into that rowdy crowd. And I had plenty of times where almost every year, well, a good 8, 9, 10 years, I was booked up all of December because they would do 4, 5, 6 nights a week of company parties. So, you'd have big tables of 10, 20 people making up these, and they're just there on their staff dues. Their bosses paid for the booze. But, my street training, doing that was easier than doing the street. And, there were a lot of the stand-ups would go out there and the crowd was just so rowdy, and they might be, they're booked to do a 20-minute set. And before it starts, the booker, the club manager would just be going, the crowd's too rowdy tonight. You guys just do 10, 10, and the rest you close it, And so they're just like getting off the stage as quick as possible. But I could still go out there and just not even, just on autopilot, just go do the goods.
Did you see anyone around at the same time that was doing, when I say similar, not the same narrative piece, but the same kind of concept? Was there anyone around who was working the crowds in a similar way?
Well, the first ones that come to my mind on the juggler circuit, Mick Dow and Men in Coats, they were doing those gigs. And then there's another routine, a duo called the Raymond and Mr. Timkins Review, and they had lots of gags to music. And just like lots of props, and here's a soundtracked routine. It doesn't matter how loud the audience is yelling or heckling or whatever. We got a soundtracked routine, and we're pulling out visual gags to the music. And they were another act who did a lot of that. And I love those acts. I love that sort of thing.
But there wasn't anyone doing your kind of classical street pantomime applied into a club venue.
I don't think I've ever even heard of someone else doing it in the States or here. There's physical things that have been done in both places. And I occasionally saw a physical act, rarely, but I saw a couple of physical acts working in the States before I came over. But I've never heard of a volunteer piece in a comedy club. Yeah.
I haven't either. Did you, in the end, because you said that before you had lots of different stuff to keep the variety going, when you're now getting booked in the clubs, they're not saying, oh, come and do your fire piece, come and do your juggling piece. They want the Robin Hood show, right? Because that's become the product they're buying into. Did you become tired of that?
No. It was my bread and butter and my Friday and Saturday night gigs. I had all those years. One of the reasons I retired was a good 10 years of never having a Friday or Saturday off. And it was being a grind for the family, and they were getting tired of it. And then other things happened. The big crash of 2008, and jongleurs went down from 21 clubs down to 7 or 8 again. And there are more and more comedians fighting for less and less gigs. But all the time that I was having, success at it, I was also doing small gigs as well. And, you get your midweek gigs. They're not paying that well. You might be playing at a place that's just a bar somewhere, a student union or whatever, and you might be playing to 20 people, 40, 50 people. Some of them beautiful gigs, some of them horrible gigs. But the bookers who were booking me for those knew me enough and trusted me enough that I'd go in and I wouldn't know. Some nights I might do a 30-minute stand-up set. Some nights I might just do my juggling set. Some nights I might do Robin Hood. Some nights I might do a mixture of the three. But I would show up at the venue not knowing which I was going to do. But even in the most god-awful pub gig, I've done plenty of pub gigs where no one has paid to be there. And it's just like, the guy behind the bar turns off the music. Goes, everyone shut up. There's a comedian coming on. I've done those gigs. And, I've pulled them off as well, because if they don't listen to anything, I can still pull out my hammer and machete and sickle, and there's holy cow, there's a guy juggling a machete in the corner.
Well, I suppose the whole challenge of that is it's like you've come into a pub and interrupted the conversation.
That's completely it. That's completely it. And, you know, one of the worst ways ever to put on a comedy gig is to make it free or make it cheap. And the audience has to buy into it, and they have to buy into you on the street in a psychological way, or they're not going to stay. And they have to buy into you for even more so for a comedy club gig. And in some ways, the jongleurs gigs were easier because people had such expectations, especially when it was new. When all those clubs were new, and there was all these cities in Leicester, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Birmingham, and people are coming, they're young, they're excited, they've never seen anything like this, and all of a sudden this is like, this is my big night out, and you've won already as soon as they introduce you. And you know, I would walk onto stage with I had a routine where I would just do visual gags to music. It's on YouTube. It's called World's Noisiest Mime. But that was a piece that was a following piece. And that following piece shrank and shrank until it was a 5-minute open the set piece. And so I would walk on stage to big round of applause, but I would spend my first 5 minutes pulling out gags and doing dancing and doing no speaking, but 5 minutes of the audience going, this is just such energy. This is such craziness. What is going on here?
And you distilled it down from being long drawn out piece on the street to build to down to its core components, I assume.
Yeah. But the best thing about developing that on the street, and I developed that in Covent Garden. And at that time, a friend of mine named Windsor was doing a lot of the similar sort of thing, following to music and occasionally putting in some gags and things. And I was working on wanting to do similar, and I was also really inspired by Lee Ross still at that time, and also Les Bubb. I had seen Les once or twice in Covent Garden, like in '88, and now this is '95, and I haven't seen Les in 7-8 years, but it's still stuck in my mind that was so powerful to be able to have the audience guessing what is going to happen to that music, what comes next, and just make it pow, 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 pow. And it became like a surefire winner for me for going on to an audience. And I don't even have to speak. I don't even have to look at the audience. I just have to do the moves. And then it stops and I've won them, and the rest is easy.
Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago that in the 2008 crash, and with jongleurs being, your bread and butter, you felt that. What was the experience like, just into a bit more detail of the kind of the economic recession that happened after 2008, working in comedy?
Even though that 2008 was when the crash happened, it was more like 2009 when the clubs started dwindling a little bit and the crowd started getting a bit smaller because people can't afford to go out. And to be honest, I think there was probably another thing of it's been 10 years of we've been going to the comedy club on Friday nights, and it's not as exciting as it used to be, and we're used to it now. I got out. My mate Windsor is still involved in comedy, but definitely when I've talked to him over the past 10 years, he's told me several times that I made the right decision, jumping ship at the right time, because so many really, really good acts are chasing so many fewer gigs. But I jumped before that happened. I think the real pinch was happening 2011, 2012, 2013, and I had gone, okay, I had a good 25-year career at it. Now it's time to just be grateful and start relaxing a bit and get the real day job. And still 11 years later, I just constantly think that, my day job, I'm in there 8 hours. I work in an Apple store, by the way. I teach people how to use Apple stuff and sell them their iPhones and things. But no,
you're a genius.
Well, no, I'm a creative. A genius is the guy who repairs a computer, and a creative is the guy who teaches you how to make your promo video, who teaches you how to put your soundtrack together on computer editing, who teaches you how to make your publicity. Because this is all stuff, and this goes back to David Castle. David, when I was living, we did a show together early on, and David was so kind to put me up at his place in Australia while we were writing the show. And he had one of the first laptops I'd ever seen, an Apple PowerBook or whatever. And then David and I traveled across Canada. Thick. They were thick and heavy, and David traveled across Canada with it. We did all of the Fringe Festival circuit in Canada one year. And David had his laptop with him. And that just set the seed in my head that as soon as I settled down in London, well, I'm going to buy an Apple computer, because I saw what David did with his, and I knew the power of what you could do. And what could you do with it? You could do your publicity. You could do your, I went from the world where we had to get VHS copies of tapes made and then pay like £20 to have it converted to send over to America, and then pay £10 postage just so you could send it out. This is per tape, so you could send it off to festivals, and you're hoping that one of them books you. And then overnight, the internet came along, and the ability to do that with a computer came along, and I loved it. And I still to this day love playing with my computer. And so that's what happened to me. I taught myself the computer because I needed it for my performance career. And now it's easy for me. It's so easy to have 8 hours a day of like working to help people. Like that is so much less energy, so much less, unbelievable less pressure. And just no stress at all compared to being on stage. And oh my God, you got to be good.
But do you ever look back and kind of think, oh, do you miss it? Even in moments, even though you're comfortable in the life you have and you're quite happy with it and it's less strain, do you never think about putting the boxing gloves back on?
People ask me that a lot. And so I think about it a lot. And I think the honest answer is I don't. I think every once in a while, I think John Park a while ago was putting something on the internet. He was like, what kind of dreams do you guys have? And it was something like he shows up at his gig with no props or stuff. And I thought, yeah, I sometimes have that. I occasionally have that dream now, and I'm supposed to be doing my show and I can't remember the lines, or I didn't bring the microphone, or I didn't bring this. And so it's more a fear, really, because I don't think I could do it. And then likewise, about 8 or 9 years ago, I discovered a new passion. And my new passion is Argentine tango. And so creatively and physically and socially, that has become my new thing. It's different, but there are so many similarities to the street performing world. And one of the biggest one is I've now become a big fan of these Argentinian tango performers and teachers, because their lifestyle is similar to what mine used to be. They will travel around the world to big festivals, and they will teach classes in the day, and they'll do a big performance at night. And these are cool, interesting, artistic people who are a lot of fun to be with. They're gypsy, bohemian people. They're the same type of people that street performers are. So now I've taken it upon me sort of for my outlet of creativity to, I've got a YouTube channel that's all my stand-up stuff, but I also have a YouTube channel that has 100 performances of Argentine tango dancers. And so
you become a videographer?
Yeah, but as a hobby, because I had to become a videographer to video myself. And now, as a favor to the dance performers, I video them for free. They'll give me free lessons. I get to hang out with them. They're nice to me because, hey, they're so grateful that I take photographs of them. And I'm so grateful that some of these most talented dance performers are giving me a free lesson. And more than that, I'm just hanging out with cool people. And it just reminds me of my street performing days. And from a physical challenge point of view, I was so into juggling when I was at university, and I would just practice my juggling all the time. And I just really, really loved it. I don't anymore, but I am, like with lockdown now, I'm doing 3 times a week. I'm doing online tango classes. And I'm, still trying to keep my mind into it so that when lockdown finishes, I can progress and keep fit, keep my skill level up, and just a challenge, a mental and physical challenge.
Well, it seems like that does scratch a lot of the itches that are been left bare by street performance. So we're reaching the last 10 minutes of the interview now. So first thing I want to ask, young performers, people who are developing in the craft, do you have anything to say to them?
Yes, I do. It's a long game. One thing that I always remembered in my years in Covent Garden, I was only in Covent Garden a couple of years, so 88, 89, and then again 94, 95. But both of those times you would see young drama students and people wannabe performers, and they'd show up on the first day and the performers give them the cold shoulder until they've shown up on the third or fourth or fifth or sixth day. And it's not the performers being cruel. It's their way of finding out how much commitment do you have? Are you gonna be here for the long run? As soon as you hang out in Covent Garden for 4 or 5 days in a row, all of a sudden those performers who were ignoring you will now start coaching you and will give you the benefit of the doubt. And I would just say you've got to do a couple of things. Watch as many shows as you can, right to the end. I just never got tired of, not even, tired wasn't even the word. I was just like obsessed with watching the act who went on the pitch before me or the stage before me and just analyzing absolutely everything. Where is that performer pausing and doing nothing, and that's building the tension and making it even better? And where is that performer knowing that it's time to wrap things up? And you only learn these things by skill. By practice, by doing it again and again. But that's the thing about the street. You can just go find a place, and who cares if you're performing to 10 people? The point is, and this was an important thing in my head as well, when I was doing those gigs, like a weeknight gig and it's 10, 12 people, it was always super, super important in my head that those people have paid the same amount of money. You cannot go out and have a bad attitude about, oh, it's a rubbish crowd, it's a rubbish room, it's going to be crap, oh, why I should be in the big room with the big crowd. No, those 10 people deserve your utmost best skill every single time. And I hope and think that I always did do that.
That's great, Bud. And so, do you think it's different when you started than now? Do you think there's a different set of problems in front of young performers? I haven't seen much lately. I live in Reading now, and every once in a while there's some people working the street in Reading, and I pass by and see what's going on. And there's some good people who pass by from time to time, but I've not really. I haven't been to any festivals, and I haven't been to the garden. And when I can get down, I definitely need to get back down the garden as soon as the lockdown loosens up, and then just hang out and see what's going on. So I don't really know. The only thing I can really think about that is different than when I started is that, now there's amplifiers and there's microphones and you and I were talking about it earlier, there's this expectation that you're doing this because you are going to get on a tall unicycle and try to make some money, which reminds me, I had a tall unicycle for a while. It was sold to me by Richie Rich, Lucky Rich. And I bought his unicycle and I then sold it to Brian Windling, my inspiration back in Kansas City. So that went from the world's most tattooed man to me, and I traveled around with it for a year. And now Brian still has it. He told me the other day, still got it. But the point being, after traveling with that tall unicycle for a year because, it's going to get me high, I'm going to make more money, I then found out what was making me more money and better crowds was not a unicycle. It was
me backing off the stage and putting some volunteers on the stage, and thinking outside of the box, other than, oh, look, here comes 5 or 6 unicyclists and they're all making loads of money. That's what I want to do.
Well, this was the thing we chatted about a little bit before we went live, was about reinstilling creative practice in the street, and how maybe the street has become a little bit victim to hunting for the big hat, you know, trying to focus everything into the idea of the big hat. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about then with the tall unicycle.
Yeah. And, you know, I think, like I talked about the fact that I took those theater sports classes. You know, I've been performing for 10 years. And then I went, okay, I'm a student again. I'm going to do the theater sports, and just go in with no ego at all. And I was in that class with lots of other people who had never done any drama training. Here I am, Fancy Pants, who's done loads of it from high school and everything. But you got to go in and with a humble attitude of going, you're never finished learning. You've always got to explore and try new avenues. Try to be a musician, try to be a dancer, you know, try everything and watch everything. That was another thing that, you know, thanking my mother for inspiring me. You know, as a kid, she took me to musicals, she took me to concerts and to the ballet and all this kind of stuff. And so from a very young age, I was just exposed to the beauty and joy of live performance. And it was just like the thing I wanted to do.
And I suppose the last thing I'll say now is there's lots of people that you've met on your journeys and have been inspirations, and a lot of them are in the comments here saying hello. Is there anything you'd like to say to all the people you've met on your way?
I know I've left out, there's loads and loads of my old buddies, Covent Garden, Patty Bramwell's for one, and Dave Evans, and on and on and on. But I'm not going to remember everybody. And also just people I met in Canada, the performers, as well as the locals who put on the festival, just the nicest people. And the same thing, just everywhere I went, being a performer, the big bonus was an introduction to break the ice and meet people. And it was, you know, I was nonstop on the road for 4 or 5 years, living out of a backpack and no fixed abode. And it was just the most fun. I wish anyone the ability to do that. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of effort, but have a go. It's really rewarding. And I just want to thank everyone who I met on the way, because I genuinely, when starting off in Covent Garden, but around the world, the street performers I met and the Kansas City Renaissance Festival, all those performers are just like my family. To this day, they're my brothers and my sisters. They're people who understand me like no one else could understand me. Understand me better than my own relatives could understand me. Because we've been through the same things, and I'm just grateful that there are other people who are as crazy as me out there. I love you.
Well, Rex, it's been another pleasure talking. It really, really has. I very much enjoyed our conversation, and you can tell by the comments a lot of other people have as well. So I suppose at this point we'll draw this to an end and say, everyone who's been watching, thank you for spending your time watching the interviews, engaging the archive. If you can, please like, comment, share. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're on Facebook, join Whining On with Public Performers, or the Encourage Broke fan page, which is the Public Performance. If you can, I know not everyone can, it's hard times, but if you can, put in support the Patreon. It'd help keep the show going. Otherwise, from that, everyone, thank you and have a lovely day. And Rex, for the last time, thank you, brother. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Matt. You're doing great stuff, Matt. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, everyone.